week for everyone. Grateful to all of you who've stuck with me through this. We had the week off last week. And so as a reminder, the way this works is this is our final week of the seminar. And at the end of today, I'm going to hand out the same survey again, but it has a 2 on top, so I know the difference. Just take it as you would, and I'm going to figure out what kind of technology does this. I haven't done this part yet, but that makes charts and graphs where you plug in the info, and I can present a nice thing and see if the seminar made a difference in the way we think about things. And as I said, this is just all part of my... They'll do that? Yeah. Okay, well, there you go. Use Excel. Really? Yeah. Oh, thanks. Awesome. I haven't even looked it up yet. All right, but that's easy. That's helpful. Thank you. I definitely can do that. And this is for my dissertation. So this part, I've done all the... So what I'm teaching in these is just little samplings of my research, and then this Ecotheology seminar will kind of be the practical part at the end of my dissertation that has the research and the results and all of that stuff. So, here, Val, go ahead and get you that. Yeah. So all that to say, I appreciate you taking part of this with me, and this is one more step towards the finish line for me. So I finished my paper for my last class on Friday night. So that means this is done and I'm just purely in dissertation writing mode. So it feels good, and it really shouldn't be. I think I've written everything I'm going to really need to write at this point. I'm just going to rearrange it all. So this is a final piece right here. So thank you all. So this is Ecotheology Seminar Session 4, which I'm calling God's Land, God's Goals. And just by way of review, what have we done so far? So session 1, we talked about a religious history of the region. We looked at the indigenous folks. They honored the earth and its inhabitants as an expression of their religious beliefs. And the Puritan colonizers, they exploited the earth and its inhabitants as an expression of their religious beliefs. Of course, these are oversimplified. The point I'm trying to make there is that the religious beliefs of these two groups of people affected the way they dealt with the land and the earth, and they interacted with the inhabitants. Session 2 was the present spiritual context of Brantford, and we learned about the spiritual but not religious population, or the SBNR. This is a growing population in the region that does not align with a specific religion, but finds spirituality through earth-based practices and experiences. Then session 3, 2 weeks ago, was biblical ecotheology, and summarizing that with the land, the animals, and plants hold intrinsic value beyond their usefulness to humans. In the beginning, God entrusted humanity with the responsibility to care for the earth, nurture life, live in harmony with plants and animals, and experience God through the natural world. One day, God will restore creation, and today, we have the opportunity to fulfill our original callings. We have the chance today as people to say, what does it look like to live into God's original design that we can look back to in the future, but also look forward to as we saw all the prophetic visions of a recreation and a restoration of the earth. So our question today is this: how should we engage with plants, land, plants, and animals as a church? So this is a question of what does this mean for a congregation to value the land, the plants, and the animals? So we're talking about practical theology. So last time we said theology of the land. What do we believe about this? Practical theology says, what do we do with this information? So it just says the word practical. So rather than saying, here's what the Bible says, here's what I believe, this asks the question, what do we do with this information? What might it look like for our congregation to be informed by ecotheology? So we're first going to look at practical theology of the land, and I have 2 points there: naming harm and naming sacredness. So first, naming harm. If a congregation is seeking to move toward the land, It is necessary to first acknowledge harm so that people can remember that this pursuit is not happening from a blank slate, but it's a work of recovery from profound harm done in the church's name. Now, some congregations have histories more connected to the exploitation of others than other congregations. Nevertheless, it's necessary to collectively recognize Christianity's failures in committing atrocities against the land and its inhabitants historically. And one really profound way, I think, we were talking about forgiveness in church today. One really profound way to move towards healing and peace is just naming a wrong. It's just saying this is true, this happened. And sometimes we have such a hard time doing that. And but nevertheless, something a congregation or churches or denominations or organizations can do is naming, which is a simple yet powerful and can take the form on websites, bulletins, plaques, memorials. And one practice some organizations find helpful is land acknowledgments. So we have one of those in our bulletin, which is simply naming people who stewarded the land before us and some other information. Naming harm and keeping truth of history visible not only reminds us of, some grim actions of the past, but it's also an invitation to a better way that Christians of the past overlooked. It's also saying, what would we have done differently? And once we've properly acknowledged land, congregations have the exciting opportunity to engage in prayer, discernment, historical and demographic research to reimagine and repurpose the land on which they worship. So you have naming harm, but then naming sacredness. Because the majority of mainline churches in New England usually own at least one parcel of land, sometimes two, like we do. We have the parsonage. And historically, many churches have viewed their properties as spaces, rightly, to facilitate worship and spiritual activities. However, a biblically and historically informed ecotheology beckons faith communities to reconsider the function of their properties. Right? And congregations may benefit from an embodied dedication of their land to say, not only is this table sacred or this baptismal tank sacred, but what about the land on which we live? Do we see that as being spiritually significant and sacred, the land on which we worship? And sometimes people have benefited from dedicating their land. Belden Lane, one of my favorite writers, describes such a practice from Shaker spirituality. Shakers aren't commonly known, but you got the Shakers and the Quakers, right? And Shakers kind of had their own village. Shakers lived, and they built chairs, and they had their own. They kind of lived, like a spiritual community. And here's one of the practices they did. It involved a ritual journey around the circumference of the Shaker village, passing through its shops and dwelling houses, up and down the fields and meadows that formed the backdrop of ordinary Shaker life. It was a ritual activity as ancient as human experience, parading the periphery of space so as to claim it in the name of cosmic powers, claiming it for the blessing of God. So they would just, time and time again, just walk through that village and say, all this that looks ordinary, no, this is sacred, holy space where we do sacred, holy things, down to building our chairs. And we want to remind ourselves of that, remind our neighbors of that, and keep that central. So there's lots of different rituals like that, but such rituals provide an exciting opportunity to commit the land as holy, as a sacred space where the divine life flows through all life forms. So you have practical theology of the land. Let's look at practical theology of animals. Two parts of that, protection and partnership. Companioning with animals cannot bypass abuse and exploitation. So the church must not simply enjoy some aspects of animal life, the pretty birds, things like that, our dogs and our cats. But we must also, and we can't do that while disregarding the mistreatment of so other animals. So a full-orbed embrace of our role as gardeners and stewards, whose original relationship with animals was one of companions and stewards, requires us to defend and name harm that happens to animals and creatures and fight for those inhabitants, right? So for creatures, for example, who make their home near or around church property, the congregation should ensure their protection once we establish this as a consecrated and holy land. And protecting species both globally and hyperlocally may take on many forms. But in the same way congregations can have a renewed vision for the land, they must also refocus the way they see animals so that their acts of protection and conservation transcend just some moral obligation, this is the right thing to do, but actually return to God's original design. So what I'm saying there is we see, like, how can we see this land as sacred? Well, then you start seeing the animals as sacred. Well, these are the ones who are sharing this area with us. What does that mean for us to relate to them in a way that reflects God's original design? So you have protection, but then you have partnership. Because beyond some human-animal peace treaty on our land, congregations can turn to animals as living sacraments, creatures through which the divine life flows. And once animals are reframed as sacred partners, worthy of our protection and companions in spiritual practice, the possibilities for congregations are endless. Hunter offers these words of guidance. He says, "Harness your imagination in your life of devotion to God. The Celtic saints imagined the Lord before them, behind them, above them, within them, or meeting them through a creature of the forest or a person in need." So there's this invitation to not only say these are animals that matter and they're worthy of our protection, but also they are beings that in their own way are making home on this earth, or their own way created, have their own value, and have their own way of worshiping. And Jesus, as we saw last time, just points over and over again to animals as teachers and as examples. So they're always there for more than just utility, for what they can do for us. They stand on their own right, and they also can teach us. That's practical theology of animals. See, I told you we're moving through this today. I'm not wasting any time. All right. Practical theology of plants. I have 2 points there. Fellowship and formation. Okay. Now, this actually is a little repetitive. You might have heard me say some of this already. An understanding of ecotheology beckons the seeker to look again at the bush, listen for a word, and perhaps speak back. However, it is not enough to simply see elements of nature as connected, but to equally see oneself in union with nature, to experience the earth as God sees it, as God infuses it. Thomas Berry says this: "The human is less a being on earth or in the universe than a dimension of the earth, and indeed the universe itself." That's all kind of lofty and complicated way of talking. But what I'm trying to get across is this: there's more than we just live on the earth and there's a plant over there and we should respect it and look at the beauty, but actually see it the different ways. We are all connected in the way God is just flowing through all of us and holding it all together. So congregations have the opportunity to become aware of the plant life on which they share the land. Ancient trees, pollinating flowers, and native grasses all have names, stories, and functions. So learning about plant life, like animal life, expands the human capacity for love and attention, cultivating a fresh experience of plant-human fellowship. So we have fellowship, then we have formation. Humanity's first assignment, according to the Genesis account, is gardening, caring for the flora that decorated Eden. And the act of gardening roots humanity in its divine assignment to lovingly prune, water, disinfect, and fertilize the silent beings that provide us with oxygen, fruits, nuts, vegetables, seeds. Therefore, perhaps the preeminent or most important task for congregations who are seeking to experience union with the earth is to engage in the ancient practice of gardening, through which they may realize their original calling. Which brings us to point number 4, the Eden Project. Yes. So here is kind of what we've been moving towards with this information. What could this all look like? And as a reminder, this is kind of my proposal. This is a very small snippet of it for my dissertation. So take that with a grain of salt, as this isn't my officially proposing this to you guys. This is my idea for what churches can do at with this information. So this is me presenting to you what I've thought and worked through, but this isn't the official we're here as a church type thing. Okay. The Eden Project. In a region remembered for spiritual revival taking place in the fields and hills under the voices of men calling people to change, it is apparent that the present New England church needs to undergo an interior revival. Therefore, this current moment presents an opportunity for congregations to repurpose their property, radically shifting from the enclosed Puritan imagination to a biblical vision, which manifests as a pursuit of Eden. Congregations have the potential to be known as spiritual communities that name harm, pursue justice, and steward and share their part of the earth with all life as a manifestation of their spirituality. So remember, we said at the beginning, the different colliding cultures. You had the Puritan colonizers, the indigenous. They related to the land as an expression of their religious beliefs, as their spirituality. So we have the opportunity to say, all right, well, what do we believe, and how does that inform how we relate to the land? Right? So that's the question congregations have. And the best way to return to our role as gardeners in Eden is to turn to the garden. And the Eden Project, trademark, is an initiative where a garden, understood in the context of Garden of Eden, meaning Garden of Eden, gardens used broadly. It's a whole kind of biosphere. It's a whole kind of area where a garden, understood in the context of Garden of Eden, is established and maintained through ecotheological spiritual practices. The garden, in line with the Eden vision, is a sacred space where all life is honored and loved. And the Eden Project envisions a space set aside to encompass all 3 elements of ecotheology, land, animal, and plants, while being highly adaptable to different contexts and landscapes. So what would it look like for the land? Well, let's use First Baptist as an example. First, and I'll say ahead of time, to be clear, I'm aware we don't actually own this land. Oh, no, this is, but I even have to talk about that as I'm doing this. It's like, it's like the land that's ours is the land that's right up against the building. So the shrubbery and stuff like that is our land. So when I speak about the land we're on, I'm either describing things we could do with right up against the building, or these would be projects that would require or would work within the town, things like that, like was done with the pollinator gardens and things like that. So, so to be clear, like this isn't like our land to just do whatever we want with. So all that would have to come into play. But for the purpose of my paper, I'm just writing the words First Baptist property. First Baptist property is a green space in the center of town which is largely vacant. The congregation will be invited to participate in regular prayer walks and take time in consecration gatherings around the property as a time of gentle attunement to the living presence pulsing through the parcel of earth. Additionally, times of quiet meditation, outdoor worship services, picnics, and play will be the pathway to loving and seeing the land with new eyes. And after a season of spiritual cultivation, there could be an official land dedication event wherein the congregation will repurpose a piece of land as a sacred space where the Edenic vision guides the way the land is spoken of and experienced. So the idea is part of this project would give the opportunity for congregations like ours to actually say, are we going to dedicate part of our land or our land in general, or just the way we see land or the land on which we meet, as a sacred, holy space, right? Where, how did I phrase this? Where the way of Eden, the way Eden looked, the way Eden was, guides the way the land is spoken of and experienced. So kind of like a renewed way of understanding the land. So you have land. Well, what about non-human? Oh, see, that's the academic term. It's non-human animals, but we just say animals here. Say animal. Did I put that on here? Yeah, it's animals. My stuff, it says non-human animals. Animals. Once the land is consecrated as sacred, the congregation must consider its inhabitants. In the same way Adam named the first animals, the Eden Project beckons congregations to learn the names of the species that live on or visit the sacred land on which they worship. First Baptist Church could dedicate days to observing, photographing, and cataloging the creatures with whom they share the land. Recognizing the needs of and threats to various species is vital to adequately protect the creatures and the land. Additionally, bees, butterflies, and other pollinators are native creatures under serious threat from the use of pesticides and land erosion and overdevelopment. Over the past few years, First Baptist Church has partnered with the town to plant extensive pollinator gardens on the green. These gardens have become a beautiful attraction for neighbors and have proven successful as bees and butterflies spend their days navigating the foliage and flowers. The pollinator garden is a piece that will nicely fit within the Eden Project framework. And beyond protecting and providing for its creatures, First Baptist Church must use the space to engage with them as living sacraments, as sacrament in the sense that this is something or someone through which you can experience God directly. Congregants and neighbors alike will be encouraged to watch, greet, listen to the animals. Ideally, when people visit the sacred land, they will recognize the distinct way in which the church relates to animal life, which will prove to be a point of connection with the spiritual but not religious neighbors. And lastly, plants. In the same way the congregation becomes acquainted with animals through study, they could also familiarize themselves with plants, especially trees. The land where First Baptist Church meets has several large trees of various species, and it will be important to photograph, study, and catalog the species on the land. The congregation will be encouraged to spend time outside, becoming acquainted with each tree, learning to call them by name. In addition to the scientific name, the church may choose to name each tree, mounting plaques in front of each tree with its various names, encouraging all who enter to engage with an ancient friend. And in addition to trees and a pollinator garden, First Baptist Church's building is surrounded by shrubs planted by landscapers or the church decades ago. And while the shrubs are beautiful accent pieces, they require maintenance and offer very little sustenance to other life forms. The congregation has already started discussions about removing a few shrubs on one side of the building and replacing them with vegetable gardens. Several parishioners are skilled gardeners who would dedicate their time to planting these gardens with peppers, tomatoes, squash, and lettuce. And signage would be erected to clearly state that the vegetable gardens are there to provide free produce to the neighbors, hopefully inviting the neighbors to come and eat from the land, which will embody the indigenous ethic of reciprocity, giving back to the land in equal measure that has been taken, which has been shown to be an effective way to connect with spiritual but not religious neighbors. Whew. All right. Yeah, so here's where we're at, and I want to be full disclosure. Land discernment my plan was for us to do a walk around the property today. I've had a headache for about 3 days. So I'm not going to walk around the property today. But what I would like to do is, what do I have written in my? I would like to invite each of you. You could do that today, or we can talk about. There's no rush to do this today, but in your own time, take a walk and envision the potential of this land that God has entrusted to us to steward. Again, these are not things we're just going to can do, but say, have I ever noticed what kind of animals come around on here? What kind of birds? What kind of trees are these? What is this? Have I spent time in the cool pollinator gardens? Have I looked at this? And just take time to say, what would it look like for us to spend more time out here to see this equally as a worship space, an alternative space for people who may not necessarily pop into church on a Sunday, but if you have some nature-based events, activities, or just a space where people can come and reflect and things like that, how could we engage people differently? So I just want to invite you to kind of just dream and imagine some ideas. Um, if you're here this week or even today before you leave, take a walk, say some prayers, look for maybe in ways God might be summoning you onto the land, recognizing that land has history. Like land holds stories. Um, Land is alive. There's so much happening. If you've ever actually sat on the grass, you notice, well, there's stuff crawling all over here, right? There's all kinds of, hey, this grass isn't native. This grass is, Who planted that fig tree? That's not native. That's what Susan was telling you, right? All this stuff, it is pulsing with life. And what we've kind of missed out on in kind of the Western Christianity, a lot of us, is the way that life pulsing is like God's pulse. Someone says, and this is kind of like an extreme way, but this is an illustration of someone was saying recently, like Earth is like God's body, almost. You have the spirit, but it's like this is all alive, and we have the scripture saying, in Him, through Him, by Him, all things are created. God holds all things together, and it's like, what does it look like to actually sit here and say, God is in this place, and these things are alive in their own way, and they communicate, and in the same way we are in seasons, they are in seasons. And hey, a tree, is its life is stationary. Ours is one where we can move around. But in Psalm 1, the psalmist tells us we should be like a tree and find one spot that's near our life source and stay there, because we're always up drifting around finding fulfillment elsewhere, and they're smart enough to know to stay by their life source. So there's just like, take time. I just want to encourage you to do that. And then I mentioned the Eden Project. So that's something I would like to start discussions on at some point. And so this will be something that'll be presented to the church, discussed more broadly. But you guys will kind of be the experts on that because you already know what I'm talking about. So if you say, you know what, if we get to the point where I bring that up and say, okay, we're going to try to do the Eden Project here. We're going to say, what does it look like to create a garden space that's not just a garden, but it's a space that we've dedicated and say this is a holy, sacred space, and we want to be able to this to be part of somewhere we come and we sit and we listen under this tree, and it's clear that neighbors come pick some vegetables here, sit down under this tree, watch the birds. Here's what this kind of, here's our tree, here's their names, this will, just all these different things. If you say, oh, well, that's something I would like to do, all right, keep that in your mind, keep praying about it, and the time will come when we gather a group like this, maybe it'll be all of you again, we discuss, well, what are some of the first steps we can take to make this happen. That's all I got. It's not 12:07, what time is it? Oh, that's a screen. It's 12:07? Well, because when I originally wrote it, I was planning us to go walk around for like a half hour, and it's like, I just don't have it in me. Oh, please, yes, Susan. Floor's open for anyone. Yes, go ahead, Susan. Wow. Wow. Brilliant. That's good. Yeah. Oh. Ooh. Yeah.
not very attractive. But we might consider, and Cindy would probably be a big help in identifying shrubbery that would work well
See, that's
for
exactly
this
what I need
purpose.
here.
But I have a huge holly bush in my front yard, and when I go out at night, um, there's all this fluttering and twittering that I
Really?
hear when I go past it, because all the little birds have taken shelter in there.
Mhm.
And it isn't even, it isn't just in bad weather or cold weather, that's when they go at night to sleep. So
I never thought
that
about
would
it.
be, that type of thing would be, I think, an asset,
Yeah.
to our landscaping. So I wouldn't get rid of all the
No,
shrubs.
see, that's why I need,
Yeah.
that's why I need you guys. I'm not an expert in any of this. This is like an interest of mine. I guess maybe my expertise, if they want to call it that, exists within the theology and the Bible of all of it. And I know I love nature and love the earth, but I've only been gardening a few years. I know I like being outside, but I don't know the species that I don't. So this is me kind of pitching my thoughts, but from this point forward, whatever we're gonna do is just collaborative, because it's like, I never even thought of that. You don't need to put up birdhouses necessarily.
Right.
If certain shrubs are bird homes, and that is natural, so.
They do build nests in there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, well, I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, rabbits have also come to
Yeah.
dwell underneath, which is, I love to see them, but they really are hard on plants.
They
They
are.
eat all kinds of plants that you wish they would leave alone, but, there's nothing cuter than a baby bunny hopping around your lawn.
I figured out just the right fence to put around my vegetable garden where we have rabbits in the yard and they cannot get into my food. It's the perfect balance.
I really find all of this very interesting. Um, I, like Jim and I, we like to take walks and stuff, and I know Jim spends a lot of time in the gardens, like last week when I was in here doing something, he and Lena were out there picking weeds and looking at flowers, and, he was showing her different things, and she was very, very interested. But I always felt closer to God when I'm at the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
But I did not know that that was a thing.
Yeah.
I just thought that was me. And I just want to tell everyone a little story. When I was down in Florida quite a few years ago, my mom was really sick, and I thought she wasn't going to make it. So I left the hospital and I went down to Port Charlotte Beach, and I just was down there on the pier near the, near the sand and stuff. I was just looking out into the ocean and with the sun, and I said, God, if you want her and it's her time, I'm okay if she can go.
Mm.
And I just put that out there into the universe, and I swear to God, a dolphin came up, swam around like this, and went off.
Jeez.
I
Yeah.
mean, I hadn't seen dolphins there or anything.
Wow.
But that was so moving to me.
Yeah.
And I just feel so close to God when I'm near the water, and it's a real thing, so that's pretty good,
It is, and I think that's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing. I think that's why I think some of us have spiritual languages, and I think some of us either we are naturally around nature, we like nature, or that's just how God speaks to us more. Because that's my experience as well. Like some of my formative moments have been just really strange things with animals,
Man, yeah.
just showing up and being like, "What are you doing here?" Like I'll just tell one real quick. Like I wrote an article about this when it happened. It's for some magazine online, but it was called Bird of God, and it was the Uvalde shooting in Texas, where they were shooting the school, and that was tragic. But I hadn't been here very long. I hadn't put the pieces together. That, oh, this group is going to take that harder than whole thing. Lee has a picture of me with it actually. Sent it forth. And there was, and then after a while, I just went outside and did one of these and just flew away over the trees. And it's like it was just kind of like God showing up
Wow, that's
in that way. Yeah, and enough that Leah's like, you need to come home. This bird is not going to leave me alone until you come check this out. And I've had a lot of those in my life, that kind of tragic points where just a weird animal shows up in a weird way, and I've learned to just kind of accept that's how God sees me. And so I think some of us who are into that, who like that, we're going to more naturally lean into that. And it's an invitation, because some people, they're not, like, they're indoorsy. They're not outdoorsy, and it's like, no, you got to come out and see what it's like to pray by the beach.
I remember right after 9/11, and for at least 2 years after, I did nothing but any spare moment I had, I was in the supply ponds.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it was the protection of the trees or what, but I just had to be there. And right after.
And that's a beautiful place to be,
It was.
because it is beautiful in spring.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it too.
Yeah.
Back about 10, 15 years ago, there's a paradigm shift in nursing homes, and the shift was a culture change, and it was bringing the Eden Project into nursing homes.
Really?
Yes.
That's very cool.
So I have experience from that perspective.
Yes.
And it was felt that we wanted to enhance the quality of life for, the residents in the nursing homes. And this was at a point where Department of Public Health, which oversees nursing homes throughout every, United States, but for Connecticut, it's the Connecticut Department of Health, didn't have regulations to allow certain things that we wanted the Eden Project would allow.
Yeah.
And that was one, bringing animals in.
Yeah.
And so we had to lobby to say, hey, this is how we can enhance the culture and make life better in nursing homes. So at that point, some of the nursing homes were bringing in and having pets, like a dog, as an example, would stay, and they would have this dog.
That's so
and
good.
then the residents would care for the dog, feed it at, when it needed to be fed, take it out. Birds, some, nursing homes gravitated to birds. And from the land perspective, it was getting the residents outside with raised garden beds, flower beds, and they would care for them.
Yeah.
And just the sereneness of that, and
Yeah.
being with the land, and just giving them meaning. Many times residents come in a nursing home and they lose control. The control is the nursing home saying, you're gonna eat your meals when we say you're gonna eat your meals, you're gonna do this when we say you're gonna do it. Where the Eden Project give them some of that control back and enhance their quality of life.
And do they do the Eden Project, any kind of Eden Project in prisons?
I don't know.
Because I think that
I'm sure some have some.
So that would be very beneficial.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so cool you're seeing here is like, this is the kind of thing that like everyone knows is good for you. And for us to say, yeah, like this is what God put us here for. And as a church, we want to show you that we really mean that. And I think that's, and people, everyone can see the value in it. And the other thing, it's the value, I said something about formation, it's the active cultivation that's actually good for you. It's one thing to say, oh, I'd like to come sit on a tree, but actually taking part in, like you said, actually feeding an animal, taking care of the bird, brushing the cat, or digging out the garden, pulling weeds, checking it, picking it, mending the soil. This is like that's where you really start having the deep experiences where it's like, I'm participating in this. Like, oh, this compost is hot. It's alive, and that's going to help get the soil ready for this, and yeah.
It gives people purpose,
It does.
and then your purpose, you're seeing it live out with the growing of a plant or
Right.
the vegetable, just as an example.
And for us, we can see that as a spiritual practice.
Yes.
And see, that's the beauty, is like in the same way we see coming and taking communion and singing hymns together, we can say, oh, it's also a spiritual practice to me to take an hour at the church garden this week as part of my spiritual practice. And
And when spring comes and I do a flower garden, I just say to Jim, I just love getting my hands in the dirt.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There's something about being on your knees, even though it's tough sometimes, just getting your hands in the dirt and moving it around, and there's just something so relaxing in it. It's just, it's a connection.
And it's that ancient, and we know that deep down, but like there's this ancient feeling of like, you're here for this. Like, you're not meant to live in a plastic bubble away from all this, as much as that's sort of like at your roots, it's like you're meant to just be all up in this, part of this,
Yeah.
helping, you know, and like even the planting, it's a mutual thing. Like I help you, you help me. Like, Garden, I'll take care of you. All right, now I get to eat some of this that came off you. It's like it is like an interplay of it's a relationship. But yeah, there's a lot there. And a lot of us, you know, may not have the opportunity or the space to do it at home, but said, okay, if we could create raised beds up along one side of the building here.
That would be so nice.
And that's what I love, you know, I know, I'm not Catholic or anything like that, but I love monks, I love monasteries. I love the idea of them. And so much of what they do is gardening. And they grow their own food, and that's you know, they go to prayers, they go work outside, they go, you know, it's like, it's very much part of their spiritual life. And so I just love the image of coming to church, but also gardening on a Tuesday morning or something.
You're saying you love monks and monasteries. When I went to Ireland, we stayed where the monks stay, in a monastery.
Wow.
So we had our own bedroom and everything, you know, they're very regimented. So it's like we would have breakfast in the morning, but this certain monk made this brown bread, which was delicious. And a different monk did something else, and it was like you had your breakfast together, but in the evening, when you had dinner, the monks prepared it, you walk into the dining room, and you go where you're gonna sit, but you can't talk. So picture me in that dining room for dinner,
Oh,
not
Val.
talking. You could not talk. So you had to just sit there, and the monks served you, they put, I thought it was steak, it was a liver, you know, I hate liver. I'm like, so I took it and put a little piece there, but you just sit there with all the people, you have a drink, you have food, you have whatever, they don't talk, nobody talks, and you just eat. And then when they get up, then it's your cue to get up and leave, and then we get up, and I'm like, oh, thank God we're out of here, we can talk now, you know. But it was kind of interesting, I mean, really, it was, you know, to see how they live, and then there's this brother who cooks, and this brother who, you know, does something else, and everybody had their own thing, you know.
And
it
what-
was interesting.
And they would say that they've dedicated their life to a life of prayer.
Yeah, absolutely.
And all of that counts. And I think that's interesting. It's like, what do you do as a monk? I live a life of prayer. What does that look like? Baking bread?
Yeah,
Garden-
right,
it's a-
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think it's an invitation for us to say like, oh, this is all a life of prayer. And listen, it's like, and maybe listen, my church before this was in inner city Philadelphia. There wasn't a blade of grass anywhere to see.
Oh, I couldn't imagine that.
Nothing. You know, it's like nothing. You know, just super urban, Main Street, busy. So you gotta imagine, I'm sitting here looking at like, look at this.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And because we don't have stained glass windows, you can look out and see it.
That's right.
And so stained glass is really good when there's nothing to look at.
Right.
When you're in a spot because I do like stained glass, but it's like nothing beats this right here. And I'm like, Trinity, why have you done this? You know, I love Trinity building, but I'm like, man, it's so
Dark.
It's too dark.
Very
It's too dark. I think it's dreary in there.
It
It's
is.
dark.
It is.
And I'm like, man, we have this.
Yeah.
And I like original glass because it's a little.
Yeah, the
you
waving.
get the little waves in there.
The wave in it, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I have a survey. Before I forget, we're gonna do the exact same survey one more time, and I'll know the difference because it has a 2 on it. If you need a pen, I'll get you one. So just do it again, and I'm gonna put them through. Accept.